I'm going to go to the program now, and I came across Ethan's name when I was reading in the New Yorker. I actually do read the New Yorker, so it comes every week and it piles up. But I read about Ethan's book called Chatter, and in the New Yorker, and I was very intrigued by it because it tapped into some two levels for me. One is personal, and that I got a lot of chatter in my head that I wish would be more productive, and it distracts me and leads me to sometimes wasting my time and or getting anxious over something that I shouldn't get anxious about. So I looked up Ethan, and lo and behold, he was at the University of Michigan, and he was also in the psychology department. Furthermore, was in the same uh, part of the university that I teach in, which is the Ross Business School. So I called Ethan and we had a really nice connection. He's from Brooklyn. I've got kids in Brooklyn. My wife's father's from Brooklyn, so Brooklyn is very dear to me. And he's at the psych department, and I got my degree in the psych department at Michigan in 1968. I don't want to, I guess I should be proud of that, but it puts me in an age group that is going through a lot of transition right now. A lot of friends of mine are online who are going through that. So Ethan and I talked, and I learned much more about. I got the book, and I got it online. I ordered a copy, and I've been using it a lot with my clients because there's some very, very good techniques. Both of us come out of the cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy school, and Ethan's work, I think, is a tremendous addition to what's been going on in that field, which has been developing for over 50 years. So he's added some really new techniques that I've used already with some of my clients. Some of you who are my clients probably know, oh, that's where Rob got that idea. And I've actually assigned the book to a few people. I think Jacob McCurry's out there. Jacob is a former football player and is finishing his degree. And I think if he had figured out how to cut the chatter, he might have caught more touchdowns while he was playing because he's thinking too much. But he was a great addition to the team and is also at Ross. So I'm going to kick things off with Ethan, and maybe Ethan, you could just tell us a little bit about the origin of chatter and how you got into it. Uh, we're going to spend about a half an hour talking to Ethan. If you have questions, comments, please put them in the chat, and I'll pass those on as much as I can. And then we're going to break into small groups, and we're going to talk about what Ethan said and also talk about your goals for better mental health this year. My goals personally are going to include using a technique that Ethan had, which I'll talk about a little later. But right now, I'm just going to kick it over to Ethan to use the University of Michigan football team analogy. Although Michigan's now become a basketball, so I should pass the ball to you, Ethan, instead of kick it over to you.
No, you should not pass the ball to me because I'm terrible at basketball. So in fact, you've probably just primed a subpar presentation. Um, so thanks for inviting me to join this group. First of all, I didn't know about this group, but I hope to become a part of it because it sounds incredible to be part of this community that gets together to hear about interesting things happening. So I'm delighted to be here. Uh, Before I tell you about the origins of chatter, maybe I should tell you what I think chatter is. And it's really simple, and I think it relates to an experience that many of us have had, which is when we experience problems, we often focus our attention inward to make sense of those problems we're dealing with. We introspect. But oftentimes, our attempts to focus inward, they don't actually help. They backfire. We end up worrying and ruminating and catastrophizing by a show of
Got a lot
virtual
of nodding
physical.
heads. Right now, you
Not,
got a lot of nodding heads in the audience. So.
I was just going to ask, can we get some nodded heads to see if that relates? I mean, it's pretty close to a universal. Um, what I call chatter is getting stuck in these negative thought loops. Rumination could be ruminating about the past, worrying about the future. The key idea is that we are using our mind to do something good on the surface. We're trying to solve a problem, but that capacity is failing us. And it can lead to a host of negative consequences. And I think three domains of life that really capture what makes life worth living to us that maybe we'll get into during conversations. It can undermine powerfully our ability to focus and perform at work. It can create social friction in our relationships. And it can also get under the skin in ways that impact our physical health in ways that are consequential. So it's a really big problem. And I've spent my career trying to understand why chatter happens, but more importantly, once it does happen, what can we do to remedy the situation? Before I give you those sneak peeks about tools, let me now go back to your question, Rob, about how I got interested in this topic. My interest didn't really follow the conventional route. I don't think. You tell me if you think this is conventional. They really started. My interest was piqued in this issue when I was 3 years old because I had a dad who was a bit unusual in terms of how dads go. And what I mean by that is my dad didn't graduate college, jumped around from sales job to sales job throughout his life, but had a voracious appetite for reading Eastern philosophy and psychology. Go figure. And one of the things he started talking to me about from the time I was 3 years old was, Ethan, whenever you have a problem, go inside, try to find the solution, introspect. And so he kept hammering that home to me. I didn't understand what he was talking about when I was 3 years old, but over time the message sank in. And and truth be told, I really relied on this advice throughout my childhood and adolescence. When I experienced problems, curveballs in life, I fortunately nothing really bad happened, but I was rejected from plenty of potential partners and such. Didn't make a tryout. I'd go inside, I'd introspect, try to find a solution, and I'd move on. It was a skill that I found invaluable, and I was really thankful to my dad for providing it to me. Then I went to college, and after giving up the pre-med track, I started taking classes in lots of different topics, and one of them was psychology. And about halfway through the semester, I got to the topic of introspection. And when I got to that topic, I basically in my mind started like rolling up my sleeves and like cracking my knuckles. Okay, this is my thing. I've been introspecting throughout my life. I know this. And that's when I came across what I now call the puzzle, because on the one hand, my professors taught me about a lot of research which showed that, just as my dad said, many people benefit from introspection throughout their lives, right? The ability to turn your attention inward, to use language, to problem solve. This is the seat of people's abilities to problem solve, to innovate, to create. An invaluable human capacity, one that distinguishes us from all other animal species. And yet, a huge number of people struggle when they try to tap into this capacity. Rather than doing all the great things I just described, they end up experiencing chatter. They ruminate, they worry, they catastrophize. And so for me, the puzzle that was really sparked was, why does this happen? Why is it the case that some people, when they turn their attention inward, benefit and others stumble instead? What are the mechanisms that push people in different directions? And most importantly, what tools exist for remedying the situation once we find ourselves going down the chatter rabbit hole? And I went to graduate school to work on that puzzle, and I've been doing it ever since. And one of the neat things that we've discovered is that there are tools all around us for managing chatter. There are tools inside us, ways of shifting the way we think about our situations that can powerfully alter the kinds of conversations we have with ourselves to improve them. But there are also tools in our relationships, the relationships we share with other people, and even in the physical world around us. And what I think science has done over the past 20 or so years is it's shined a spotlight on these tools, which gives us the opportunity to be a lot more deliberate about how we use them. So that's the origin story, Rob, and a little bit more. Let me stop there and throw it back to you, and you could tell me how you want to proceed.
Sure. There's so many questions I have, but I think that there's been a lot of techniques in cognitive behavioral therapy uh, that have developed, and I know you studied with Seligman and other people. But could you talk about how this expands the field and what you've done? I know you've done some research on using scientific methods that go beyond insight. Maybe you could talk about that and your lab, which is really great. Could you say the name of your lab? I love the name.
It's the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory.
So doesn't how many people want to go to the emotion and self-control category? Yeah, everybody's good. Is there a waiting
Y-
list? You'd be busy as heck.
Yeah, it's funny. We didn't put much thought into the branding of the lab, but I've been talking to people about this book for the past month, and people really like the name. They want to come hang out. And I encourage you to all come out, bring all your self-control difficulties or the tools you use to manage them, and we'll chat and hopefully learn from you.
Great.
So you asked how this is different. Well, one of the things that we look at in my lab, we really focus on um, self-regulation, or our ability to use strategies on our own to work through problems. And um, one concept that we've really put a lot of effort into studying is the concept of psychological distance. And we find that this concept can be really powerful. One of the things we know about chatter is that when chatter strikes, it zooms us in on our problems really narrowly, right? We're focusing, and that makes sense, right? We've got a problem, we're trying to solve it. And so we narrowly zoom in, but we over focus. And by zooming in too narrowly, we lose the ability to look at the bigger picture. And what we've discovered is that in those circumstances, the ability to get some psychological space, to step back, if you will, from your experience, to think about it from a slightly more objective standpoint, can be really, really helpful. And just as a proof of principle exercise I like to run with people, I'd like to ask you to think about a situation in which a friend or a loved one comes to you with a problem that they're experiencing chatter about. They don't know what to do. It's driving them nuts. And they present the situation to you, and you're able to give them advice about how to proceed. I realize I'm talking to a lot of coaches here, so I'm stacking the deck, in my favor. But has anyone here experienced that situation? Yeah, I
Barb,
can't see
Barb, you want to talk
everyone.
about it? Barb has got her hand up. Barbara Malay.
You want to share, Barbara?
Oh, yeah. Well, so my daughter, she has ADHD and anxiety, so she's been clinically diagnosed, but she's been working most of her life with therapists, so she's got a lot of these control techniques in her own, experience, but she will still get caught in it. And so she'll be, in that loop, in that remunerating, in the seeing that the end of the world is coming. And it really does take having either myself or her husband sort of helping her to step back. So even when somebody knows what to do with the tools, it still can be really hard to recognize it when you're in it.
Because you're immersed in that. Thank you, Barbara. I mean, what you're describing is a state that I think we all have experienced, where we are immersed and we're incapable of tapping into the rational mind, if you will, to problem solve, and reliant on other people. Well, what we've discovered is that there are lots of tools that exist for helping us get distance from our own problems so that we can think about them more objectively. And they're quite varied, and they're usually really easy to use. And so I'll give you a couple of examples to be concrete. One thing that we find is useful is something called distanced self-talk, and it involves coaching yourself through a problem like you were talking to someone else. And the way to do that is to actually use your name as you're working on a problem, silently, not out loud. That's a critically important caveat. You don't want to talk to yourself out loud with your own name. That can elicit certain reactions that you might not want others to have. But all right, Ethan, how are you going to deal with this situation? That might sound silly. We see people do that, and they're the focus of episodes on Seinfeld or New Yorker cartoons. But we have studied this tool, and others have as well, and we find that it reduces people's tendency to ruminate. You could see these effects in rumination networks in the brain. It enhances people's ability to perform under stress. How does this work? Well, think about when we use names and other non-first person pronouns, words like you. We virtually exclusively use those parts of speech when we think about and refer to other people. And so the idea is that when you use the language of other people to refer to yourself, it's like a psychological jujitsu technique. It's automatically switching your perspective and getting you to relate to yourself like you are someone else. It's putting you in a position to coach yourself through a problem like you might coach someone else. The interesting thing about this technique is that many people stumble on it in their own lives. Has anyone here ever found themselves using the second person or their name when they're amidst experiencing stress? A few people, yeah. Okay, so you're not nuts. Like it's normal. People do this, and in fact, you could see traces of this throughout history. Julius Caesar, Henry Adams, Bob Dole, LeBron James, Jennifer Lawrence. During times of stress, they flip into talking to themselves using their name. That's a distancing strategy. It's super simple to use, and it's one tool that you can use to manage chatter. Let me shift to another distancing
I would
strategy.
just ask you one thing.
Yeah.
If maybe you could demo this with somebody, would that be okay? I think this is a really powerful technique that I've used in the last few weeks. And let me ask Megan, are you out there, Megan Torrance?
Yeah.
Okay, Megan, you put in there that you got lots of chatter, and you're a CEO, and you run, you got a daughter, and you got a lot of challenges. So maybe you could talk about this, and you think could coach you into how to use this technique. You want to
Sure.
describe? Yeah, go ahead, Ethan. You could question her.
Well, the thing about this technique is how deceptively simple it is to implement. And so when you're experiencing chatter with, I imagine there are many sources of your chatter, Megan, on a daily basis as a CEO. It could come from your family, your employees, and so forth. When you find yourself getting stuck, the instruction would be, okay, well, use your name and try to work through the problem and coach yourself using your own name and you. And I would simply ask you to do that. I mean, this is what we do in laboratory studies. We put people under really high stress conditions. Anyone know what the most effective way of inducing stress is in the lab? Okay, I'll tell you. So it's what I'm doing right now, but live. We bring people in and from the community, students, and we say, thanks for coming to the study. Today, we're going to ask you to give a speech on why you're ideally qualified to land your dream job. And we want you to talk about your strengths and weaknesses and provide real world examples that illustrate how you've overcome your weaknesses in ways that perfectly position you for this opportunity. We're going to give you 3 minutes to prepare. You can't take notes. There's no computer. So this really powerfully induces stress, chatter, and then we randomly assign flip of a coin. In one condition, all right, so one of the things we want to know in this study is how do people report working through their feelings to prepare themselves for a stressful engagement? Think board of advisors presentation, board of directors presentation, right? In one case, we say some people report trying to work through their feelings in the first person. So that's what we want you to do. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? In the other group, we give them the exact same instructions with one difference. We say, some people report trying to work through their feelings using their name. So that's what we want you to do. Coach yourself through the problem. When you shift to using your name, what we find in these studies, and by the way, we actually have people give their speeches in these experiments. And then we rate how well they perform during these presentations. People who use their name give better talks.
Megan,
We also,
I just wonder if Megan could try this out. I don't know if you have a situation, Megan, where you've been saying, you're in your head about it. Is there something like that you could think about?
Actually, right now, being called out in front of a group of people to do this live provides not only a space in which I don't feel psychologically safe, but one in which I might want to try out things like this. So Ethan, I'll actually defer it to you. If you want to continue your message, because you were on a roll and I was actually really resonating with what you were saying. At the same time, I had a lot of chatter thinking about the stress of doing this in front of everybody. So Ethan, I'll let you make that call on how you want to run your session today.
well, let me be a chatter advisor for you and say that I'll keep going. You need not experience chatter. We don't want this to be chatter provoking. And that's actually a good segue because I'm just looking at the time and there's so much I want to chat with all of you about. And I think we're going to break up into rooms in a second. So I don't want this tool that I'm talking about, in short, to finish what I was saying, when you use your name, we look at records, we get these thought scans, we ask people to tell us what they're thinking about. People are in coach mode when they're using their name. All right, Ethan, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go in, you're going to give the speech, and when it's done, it'll be over with. You've given hundreds of speeches, not a big deal. It's all about a challenge mindset. Like you would give a pep talk to a colleague. That's what we find this shift to name doing for oneself. When you're in the I mode, it's all about threat. Oh my God, how am I going to perform? I'm being called out. What am I going to do? And that puts you on a totally different path. This distance self-talk, this is one of 26 different tools I talk about in the book. So I don't want to go too far into it. Let me just say, there are lots of other things you could do on your own. One other easy thing you might think about, one thing that I do when it comes to COVID chatter, has anyone experienced pandemic chatter the last couple of months, right? I do something called temporal distancing or mental time travel, right? When instead of thinking just about the agony of having to give talks to lots of people while I have a 7-year-old gnawing at my sock incessantly, right? I did an interview the other day. I was watching with my wife, and we saw that both children could be seen through that glass door running back and forth, making faces. Despite all the threats, it continues. This is a source of a lot of chatter for me, right? So I can zoom in on that, and it can be really destructive. Doesn't let me do my work, makes me upset. Or I could do something called temporal distancing. I could think about how I'm going to feel 9 months from now after I'm vaccinated. Traveling in time, putting myself into the future, thinking how I'm going to feel once this acute stressor is over, what that does is it makes it very clear that what I'm going through is temporary. It will pass. That gives us hope. And we know that hope is a powerful tool for assuaging chatter. So that's another very simple shift that one can engage in when they're in the midst of chatter. So that's something you could do on your own. We can also go to our environments, though, for chatter support. And this is not something that I think a lot of people are aware of. Let me ask all of you another question. How many of you here, when you're feeling stressed, find yourself cleaning, organizing, tidying up? Okay, so quite a few hands. I find myself doing this, which is incredibly strange for me because although, I put on a nice shirt that's fresh from the dry cleaner today, I'm usually not that organized, right? They're usually books and piles, absent-minded professor all over the place. When I experience chatter, though, when my stress goes up, I find myself getting everything in my office in tip-top shape. When I was writing my book and there were moments of chatter, I spent 4 years writing it, I found myself going to the kitchen and scrubbing the pots and pans and cleaning the island and putting everything away. My wife was never so happy, and I actually became nervous because I began to think that she was hoping that I would become more filled with chatter on a more regular basis so the house would be kept in greater order. So what is interesting about this is the following. Here's the scientific insight. When we're experiencing chatter, we often feel like we don't have control of our thoughts. Things are chaotic in this head. They're disordered. And what we've learned is people can compensate for that experience by creating order in their environment, right? So you can regulate your mind from the outside in. And there are lots of other ways we could do that too. Let me pause there. Let me just pause actually, because I'm sensitive to the fact that we only go till 9:30. I think there's a norm in this.
We could go to 9:45. I think people are.
Okay, we could go to 9:45. How do you want to play it, Rob? This is your show. I love this stuff. I could keep talking and we could have a conversation in which we just do it like this. We could go breakout session. I know at some point, I know you tend to do breakouts, so I don't want to,
Yeah,
I don't want to crash.
I think we could go a little bit longer. I think people are fascinated, and just from a raise of hands, how many would like to just have Ethan keep going for a while? Yeah, I think you've captured the audience pretty well, Ethan. And I think if we go to a few people and applications, and then we could go to breakout. But Jacob, are you out there?
I am out there, yes.
Jake, can you turn on your camera?
Yeah, I will. Just woke
Right.
up. I'm a little tired.
Jake's a student, so this is a definite push, and he's recovering from COVID too. So thank you for being here, Jacob. But Jacob, you and I have been coaching. I've been coaching you about some of this, and I know you reached out to Ethan. Could you talk to talk about this? And maybe Ethan, you could comment on it. But how have you applied some of this to the chatter that you've been trying to manage?
Yeah. Well, it's nice to see you, I guess, in person or in person virtually, Ethan. I think Ethan touched on the biggest way that I'm using it, which is speaking to myself as in Jake. So when I'm doing things, for example, when I'm working out or when I find myself in a situation like right now where I got nervous to speak in front of everybody here, I said, okay, Jake, calm down. It's normal that you're experiencing these. And what Ethan actually spoke about in the book is you can use your heart pumping, what's going on in your chest, all the emotions to your advantage. So it can really make you better. It can make you stronger. And I think that's the main way that I've used it so far.
Ethan, if you could go backwards, I know you played for Michigan football for a few years. What, 4 years there?
You mean Jake there?
Jake,
Ethan, you
I'm sorry.
mentioned
I'm
Ethan.
sorry.
Ethan has had fantasies about playing for Michigan football, but the fantasies always end with me dying because Jake, when I look at your peers, I think to myself, one hit and I would just crumble. So
Yeah, it's not fun.
Jacob, you were a receiver, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And if you had applied this to your work, how might you have been better as a football player?
I think it would have been a lot better. I think my main issue was just my mind constantly wandering about the past and about the future while I was playing in that moment. And as I spoke to Ethan about yesterday, the more I thought about this after you asked me over the past 4 minutes, Rob, um, my mind was just constantly worrying and I was trying to always control it. So I thought the enemy was those thoughts themselves. But as Ethan articulated in his book, and what really changed the way I thought about those thoughts is the key to beating chatter is not eliminating the thoughts, it's dealing with them better. And that allowed myself to really speak with myself more and have conversations with myself, but have fun with it and have better conversations. So if I were to go back maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I had a lot of chatter and up until December when that chatter continued, I would have just allowed myself to think, but use the techniques so that I was able to have better conversations with myself and not try to eliminate thoughts all the time and just be present.
let me just thank you, Jake, for bringing that up. I want to just punctuate that because while researching the book and talking to a lot of people from a lot of different places about it over the past month, I can't tell you how often I hear from people, I just want to silence that voice in my head. I want to rid myself of the ability to introspect and have any running inner commentary. My response when I hear that is I would not wish on my worst enemy that they did not silencing of the inner voice. I actually tell a story in the book about a neuroanatomist who had a stroke that wiped out her temporarily her ability to use language. And at first, she described that experience as euphoric because when she lost her linguistic faculties, she also lost all of her worries and anxieties. But then she realized that she also lost a sense of who she was, her identity, because we use this voice in our head to do so many different things. We're constantly trying to make sense of the world and how we do it. Language helps us do it. So I really don't think that the goal should be silencing the voice, as Jake was saying. It's about how do you minimize the chatter to let your mind do the wonderful things it evolved to do: problem solve, create, innovate. So thanks for bringing that up, Jake. I want to talk about one other tool that I think is going to be centrally relevant to everyone on this call, and it is other people. And one of the we do know, as I mentioned before, that other people are in a prime position to give advice to others, right? We also know that we're much better at giving advice to others than we are taking that advice ourselves. There's a name for this actually. It's called Solomon's paradox. It's named after the Bible's King Solomon, who is famous for being a wise leader, but his kingdom actually crumbled because he didn't take his own advice, and he had like dozens and dozens of concubines, and it didn't work out very well for him. So other people can be an amazing tool for us, right? But there's an important caveat here. Not all conversations that we have with other people can help us deal with our chatter. And in fact, I think a lot of the ways that we approach conversations to get help can often steer us astray. What I mean by that is the following. There's a very popular idea that when we're experiencing chatter, what we should do is we should find people to vent our emotions to. Just get our emotions out, unload, and that'll help us feel better. Is this idea familiar to folks here? Hands, please. Heads, hands, fingers. Aristotle talked about it, Freud, and many others since. This is a default assumption many people have. What we know is that venting your emotions doesn't help people manage their chatter. And in some cases, it can actually make it worse. So what venting does, when I find someone to talk to unload my feelings, that can make me feel really close and connected to the person I'm talking to. Like there's someone there who cares enough about me that they're willing to listen. This is great, right? It strengthens our friendship, and the research shows that. But what venting doesn't do is it doesn't help shift our perspective. It doesn't give us a new view on the problem. That is what is often needed to work through our chatter and stop suffering from it. So what often happens instead is, Rob, you and I have a conversation about a negative interaction I had. It's driving me nuts. Can you believe that guy said this to me? And you said, what did he say? And he said this, and then I felt this way. I feel good about our bond, but I leave that conversation talking to myself out loud in distress, because essentially all we've done is rehash the negative experience. So we've just kept the fire burning. And so the best kinds of exchanges between people for managing chatter are exchanges that do two things. First, you do talk a bit about your emotions to someone. You need to tell them what happened and share how you felt, establish a bond. But then you ideally find someone to talk to who can help shift your perspective. And so I think there's an important lesson here for us when we're seeking support for our chatter, but there's also an important lesson here for us as leaders when we're interacting with folks, friends, and colleagues when they're struggling, and how we can help them work through it. You want to do both of those things, support, but also provide advice.
Thank you.
So I wanted to convey that. Yeah,
Great.
you wanted to jump in,
This
Rob.
might be a good point to go into small groups. I know some of you may need to sign off earlier. If you do, that's fine. Just let us know. You don't need to let me know. Just drop out, and we will go to 1:45. So we're going to break into small groups for about 5 minutes right now. Emily, is that a good time? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to do that. You'll be in a group of 3. Just quickly introduce each other, and then maybe respond to Ethan's wonderful talk, and think about a technique or insight that you've had from that you want to share with the group. So we're going to be magically transported to another world, Ethan. This is the dark matter that we don't know where it goes, but we're going to end up in a new world. So let's go.
This is Frank Hunt. I was telling these guys I was using my Apple TV on my iPhone, so it's like I have 3 different pieces of technology, and I couldn't figure out why my mic would not go on. So that created that was my stress, right? I couldn't turn my mic on. I was embarrassed. It's like, hey, I can't just say hello to anyone.
Did any of those tools help?
In
It's
the
okay
moment,
if
no. In the moment, no. In the aftermath of what happened, I'm going, yeah, I was kind of using the technique of knowing I would get through this.
Okay,
But that's more of my own maturity of knowing this is,
right.
I'm not gonna crash and burn here. This too shall pass, right?
Well, that's actually temporal distancing. That's exactly temporal distancing. So that worked. But Frank, I want to. The reason I asked, I was actually hoping you might say that one or two of the techniques didn't work for you, because that raises that. Well, you kind of did, so it's all good. And you weren't. I didn't plant you in the audience by any means. I don't know if I said this before, but even if I did, I'm gonna say it again, because I really, really believe it. We just talked about this a little bit in our breakout session. I'm a fervent believer that there are no magic bullets. There are no single strategies that work for all people in all situations. And I think I urge caution if you come across work that promotes any intervention as such. What I know is that there are many different tools that exist, and different combinations of tools work for different people in different situations. The challenge that scientists like myself are now facing is to figure out how can we figure out what unique blend of tools work best for Harry as compared to Ed, right? We're doing work on that, but we don't have the insight to share it right now. So what that leaves everyone else with, though, is a personal challenge, which is to learn about what the tools are, and then to start doing some self-experimentation to figure out what actually works for you. What is the unique blend? And so I just wanted to make sure I conveyed that point before we left. But there I go again, taking over the conversation and the mic. Rob, you might have had other plans, so
no. This
sorry.
is great. And we want to hear from you. I have a question for Ethan that a lot of people that I work with have some negative event way from the past that is like a trauma. And it may be a real trauma in the sense that they were in a war or somebody died, or they did something that had huge consequences. But or it may be something small, like they broke up with a girlfriend and they really, the girlfriend broke up with them or the boyfriend broke up with them and they can't get over that. So how do you deal with that, which is the long-term traumas?
Well, traumas come in two forms, probably 200 forms, but I'll reduce them for two forms for this conversation, which is there are those that are clinically distressing that are, creating impairments that are preventing you from living the life you want to live, getting in the way of your ability to do work really for a sustained period of time. And those kinds of traumas, I suggest they need a more heavy-handed kind of intervention of the sort, Rob, that you probably provide in your practice. So in those instances, I would recommend seeing someone who practices an empirically supported type of therapy. But the other kinds of traumas or everything from the minor faux pas to the bigger rejections that our life is filled with, those are precisely what the tools in the book are meant to help people deal with. The reason those kinds of experiences keep resurfacing in our head is because we haven't quite made sense of them. We haven't created a story that nips them in the bud and gives us a sense of closure. And often when you have a little space from your experience, it becomes easier to tell that story in a way that lets you move on. And so that's really what we study in my lab and what the tools in the book are there to help us do. Let me throw in, does anyone have a question? If not, I can throw in one other. I think it's a pretty cool and not on the radar tool to maybe leave you with.
Ethan,
Right.
I have a quick comment.
Hey, hold
Dr.
on just a minute, Hermelin. I just
Yes.
want to say before people sign off, Ethan, you said people could get your book and get a signed copy or a plaque. Could you mention how to do that?
Yeah, well, you can if we're all local here, you could just stop by the house, and I'm happy. I'd love to socially distant, nod my head, and we could do a signed copy that way. Or if you shoot me your address, I'm happy to send a book plate over. That would be my pleasure. You could get the book. It should be anywhere, and if it's not, let me know, and I will get very.
And I would encourage people to buy local if you can. I mean, I know it's hard these days because it's so easy to have a book delivered, but we have a couple of Literati is a wonderful place. Little Professor, these are local, particularly Literati. So they need the business. They've had a tough time with people not being able to come in the store.
Hey, Rob, maybe put that in the chat.
Good idea to buy from Literati. And all right, great. And I see a couple hands up that people want to share. So go ahead. Who was asking? I cut somebody off.
Oh, I had a kind of a parallel to make to
Hermelinda, we can't see your lovely face. Are you there? Or
I am here. I'm just sitting in my car, but
there you go. There you go.
I'm Hermelinda. So
Hermelinda is known for her smile, so I didn't want to miss that.
So when I think of the temporal distancing, what I think about is how when a lot of people are struggling right now, and when they talk to themselves, they're really harsh about how they do this self-talk. So it reminds me of when you tell someone to have grace with themselves and to treat themselves like they would a good friend. So I think distancing yourself from the situation and kind of talking to yourself in the third person, so to speak, is kind of what that is doing. You're kind of removing the personal part of it, and you're dealing with yourself like how you would deal with another person, which is usually more compassionate.
Yeah, Hermelinda, thanks for bringing it up. There's a great way of one way of capturing that self-compassion work is, reverse it's the golden rule in reverse. Treat yourself like you would treat someone else. So I think there is a self-compassion component, and self-compassion can be really good. There is one interesting thing that we find about self-talk, though, the distant self-talk that's really interesting. Because we get these thought records, which are fascinating. And if we had more time, I'd read you some of them. It's really fun sometimes to get inside people's heads and actually see what they're thinking about. We often find that when people are like in the speech task where we really stress people out and we're trying to get them to perform better, the people in the distant self-talk group, sometimes their inner monologues, they're definitely more challenge oriented. Like, you can do this, but they're stern. Like, I joke that I see my high school wrestling coach come out sometimes when it's me and I'm in this situation, dude. It's like, all right, you got to get your act together and get to it. So it's almost like a tough kind of support. It's not always the everything will be fine and that's okay. That kind of self-compassion, it can be very, very helpful. But I also don't want people to think that a little bit of negativity should be something we always try to avoid. Negative emotions, they're good in small doses. They serve a really important function, right? Like anxiety, little bit of it, very, very effective. It makes sure that I come to a talk prepared and can actually, fire off a presentation rather than just show up sloppy. So negative emotions in small doses can be useful, as can self-compassion.
Could you comment? Do you know the movie? It's a cartoon movie where it's about people talking to themselves, about characters, about little girls.
Yeah, Inside Out.
Yeah, that's a wonderful movie. Could you comment on how accurate that is about what's going on?
Very inaccurate, exceptionally inaccurate when it comes to emotions and what we know about it. However, very, very useful in some other ways. So, we don't have little people in our head. We don't have like an anger and an embarrassment that are just talking to us, and it's different voices of different emotions, which is what the Pixar movie illustrates. But what the movie does capture really well is the idea that we have voices in our head. Like, we can hear our moms, our dads, and we talk to ourselves, and that's a part of how the mind works. Now, what's interesting thing about it is that that's an experience that is common to, I'd argue, all of us on this call to some degree, but it's such a private experience. It's not something that we talk about at cocktail parties. We don't even necessarily talk to our kids about this, right? And so as a result, it's something that's incredibly intimate, but that we never get any information about. And given the outsized role that this voice can play in our lives in terms of impacting our performance and our health and our relationships, I think beginning to think about what this voice is and how it works is really, really important. That's like a concluding remark. I didn't want to end. I didn't want to wrap it up. So, but I want to go back. Let me tell you about one other tool, because it's really cool, and it's experiencing awe, the emotion of awe. And it's another way that we can control our chatter from the outside in, from the environment. So did anyone here watch the Mars rover land last week on Mars?
Yes.
Was anyone filled with the emotion of awe when they watched that happen? A sense of, how is this possible? This is so unbelievably amazing. Right? So awe is an emotion we experience when we're in the presence of something vast that we have trouble understanding, trouble explaining. Like, I fly under normal circumstances, a couple times a month. I still have trouble understanding how human beings figured out to get a tin can, elevate it off the ground, and put people in it and safely land it somewhere else. Like, that's a mind blower to me. And when I then think about like interplanetary travel, unmanned interplanet. Like I don't understand it. I don't know how we figured out to do that, to land a SUV on Mars. It fills me with a sense of awe. And what we know, what science has shown, and this is pretty recent, is that when people experience awe, that leads to something called a shrinking of the self. It leads us to feel like our own problems are a lot smaller by comparison. Like when I'm contemplating how we figured out how to travel through space, my concerns about being rejected on my last article, they feel a little bit smaller when I'm comparing them to that grand experience. And so seeking out experiences in the world that promote a sense of awe is another tool that exists for managing chatter. And you can get awe from lots of different places. You could get it from the Arboretum, which I try to do regularly, right? Like here are trees that have been here for hundreds of years. How does that work? I don't get it. It fills me with awe. But you could get it by, watching videos of your kids taking their first steps or looking at a great piece of art. And so that's just another example of a tool that is really, in my mind, hidden in plain sight. It's a tool that exists for managing our chatter. And if you know where to look for it, you can begin to be a lot more deliberate about using that tool in your life when you struggle. And that's true for most of the tools that I talk about in the book and that I've studied. And they're there just waiting to be used. And the what the science does, the hope, is that they provide us with the opportunity to be a lot more deliberate in how we use these tools with ourselves and with our friends, our employees, our loved ones. So I just wanted to leave you with that awe
Well,
tool,
you
because I
keep
think it's
wanting
so
to leave,
special.
but we keep having more questions. Ethan, are you okay for time?
Yeah, I have something at 10 that is a hard stop, but otherwise I'm happy
All
to
right, well, let's go for a few more
chat.
minutes. I have so many questions, but one that I found fascinating, I found a lot of my therapist friends have moved into doing therapy about meditation and being in the moment, and this idea of could you just comment on that? I mean, it seems to me it's really a paradox to be in the moment. So
Yeah, so I grapple with this a little in the book. So number one, I think mindfulness meditation, useful. There's science behind it, but it's one tool. And what did we say before? No magic bullets. So if you're looking to meditation as the panacea, keep looking. You're not going to find it though. It's one tool amidst many. So I advocate this toolbox approach. I think refocusing on the present when you're struggling can be useful, but it's impractical to strive to always be in the present, to always be in the moment. It's impractical because the human mind evolved to not be in the present. This is one of the things that makes us so unique. We can travel in time in our minds. We can think about the past, learn from the past, and plan for the future. We spend between one half and one third of our waking hours not in the present, floating away, past, future. And a lot of that time we spend floating away, I would argue, is extremely valuable time. I mean, how many people here value being able to get lost in thought, to think and innovate? And do people like doing that? It's an essential skill. I would argue, and there's
I have a request for you around that. Could you write a
yeah.
note to my wife about that?
First, I mean, well, that's a separate conversation, Rob. We'll have to. I don't think it's a surprise, though. If there's the stereotype of the absent-minded professor who forgets where he parked or she parked his car. Like, I actually had to stop driving to work at Michigan because I was on several occasions. I was hosting speakers, and when it came time to take them to dinner downtown, I forgot where I parked the car in the garage, and we just would walk around over and over. Very embarrassing. There's utility to getting lost in thought, to floating away. It helps us solve problems. It helps us think. So my perspective is, when we're struggling, when we get stuck in the past or the future, rather than shutting that whole system down and saying, let's just stop going back and forth and be in the moment, let's figure out if there are ways to just travel in time more effectively. How do we help people think about the past and the future without getting stuck in those different periods of time? That's what the tools I talk about in the book really help people do. And I think it they help us work with the machine in a certain sense, rather than working against the way the mind is constructed to always be in the moment. They're helping us do what we normally do just a little bit better.
That's fascinating, and I think the whole aspect of your book that I like. Well, I like a lot of it. I like the part about the baseball player and Rick Ankiel, who had, I guess they call it the yips.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we develop habits. Athletes, especially, develop these complex habits. I mean, I don't know if Jake is still here, but a pitcher on the mound, for example, the ability to throw a fastball or a curveball. There are multiple components that you build up over time to do this right. I'd argue that the same is true for leaders when they're giving presentations, right? There's ways of undulating our vocal tone. I'm gesticulating, I'm moving around, I'm smiling, I'm trying to smile. Maybe I'm not smiling enough. These routines, they work because we don't have to think about them, because we perfect them over time and we then just execute under pressure. What chatter does is chatter zooms us in on those routines when we're nervous about something. And what it ends up doing is dismantling them. So for Rick Ankiel, who was touted to be one of the next greatest pitchers of all time, he's on the mound during the playoffs. He throws a wild pitch, very unusual for him. He winds up, he throws another wild pitch. Then the chatter starts going. What just happened? What am I doing? Where's my weight? Am I squeezing the ball too tight? What about my delivery release? What he's essentially what the chatter is doing in that instance, it's leading him to break the habit. And it leads to something called paralysis by analysis. I love that phrase. And that's one of the ways that chatter can powerfully undermine performance under high stress conditions. The other ways that it can impact performance in the workplace, for those who are interested, since I know many of you work there, is it consumes our attention. We only have so much attention that we can devote at any given time to something. Has anyone had the experience of trying to read a couple of pages in a book when they're ruminating about something, only to get to the end of those pages and realize they didn't remember anything that was read? Right. This happens to me, sadly, at the dinner table, and this is a genuine admission of guilt here on my part. Sometimes, if my mind's racing and I'm sitting at the table with my family, and my my 7-year-old's telling me about her day, like, in the abstract, I want nothing more than to learn about my daughter's day, but I'm thinking about the difficult exchange I had with a colleague, and she tells me something, and then when she's done, I don't remember anything, right? That's what chatter can do. It sops up our attentional capacity. And as a result, we can't focus on the things we want to focus on. Maybe it's my daughter at home. Doesn't happen too often. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. But at work, like, that's your ability to do your work. So that's, I mean, thanks for bringing that up, Rob. I mean, that captures how toxic chatter can be when it comes to performance.
So,
Not a good thing.
Yeah, I have an example of that. I have a bum leg, and for years I walked just fine, and now my right leg and my left leg are doing different things. So my right leg will not operate the way naturally. So I have to think about lifting my foot, and this really throws off my walking, because something that was natural for years, for 70 years, has become now something I have to think about, or I'll stub I have foot drops, so I'll stub my toe.
Yeah.
So that's an example of what I thought about. So I started to say to myself, Rob, just walk. You can do all this exercise, but just walk when you're walking, and don't stop to think about it. And that's helped some.
But I want to pause there, Rob. Did everyone just hear how he talked to himself? He used his name in the second person you, right? You just used distant self-talk in your description of how you remedied that situation. That wasn't rehearsed. That wasn't planned, right? You just did it. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we're going to wrap up, Ethan, and I think it's been a wonderful conversation. You're very gracious and you're very generous to offer people to sign the book. helping me with getting a mic, that's going to cost me $150. And so I think, that generosity it comes across, and your warmth comes across. So we wish you very well. And, you're a great resource in the community. I'm going to drop by your lab and, get some joy out of it. I think it'd be probably great, but it's probably one room, right? Or is
Oh,
it?
no, no, no. We've got quite the elaborate suite. I mean, we have to stress people out to figure out how to help them. And so we've got lots, it's like a medieval torture. I'm joking. But it is a nice, anyone who's interested should come by. It's newly renovated with
Are you
fancy
are you in the main
scanners.
campus there?
Yeah. We're on the main campus, the East
Where the
Hall.
old engineering building is, I think. That's where psychology is.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, this is a long way from when I studied in school, but I have to tell you a little story. When I was at Michigan in '68, Albert Ellis came to talk, and Albert Ellis was the founder of some of this work. And then I moved to New York, and I got into a group with Albert Ellis, and it was so useful for me that it encouraged me to take risks. So one risk was asking my girlfriend to get married, and we did, and we're still married 50 years later. Another risk was to apply to the very best graduate school rather than not applying at all. So I got into Harvard, and I got turned down by other schools, but I got into Harvard, believe it or not. So that group really used some of these techniques going back to the 60s. Albert Ellis was a founder of it. So I think you've expanded that work tremendously, and I really applaud you for that. So let's all give Ethan a great hand here.
Well, thanks for having me. This was really some of the most fun I've had. I've been doing a lot of talks about the books over the past couple of weeks, and this was it was enjoyable to be doing it with folks who are my people. So thanks for coming, and I hope we get a chance to interact some more in the future.
I did forget, there's one thing I wanted to mention to you about the Mars mission. I'm not going to say that I was on it, but the guy who really helped make it happen is a man named Thomas Zurbuchen. And Thomas Zurbuchen was a professor at the university, and he's been on this panel before as a speaker. And Thomas has agreed to come back in the near future. So we're going to feature Thomas, and he's going to talk about all the wonderful things. He's now the research director at NASA.
Oh,
and he was a
fantastic.
coaching client, and actually, through our coaching, he decided this is what he wanted to do, and it's turned out tremendously for him. So he'll be one of our speakers in the future, and I'll let all your folks know, because it'll be really interesting. He's going to talk about the inside of getting on Mars and show some video of Mars and everything else. So it'll be very cool.
Well, I hope I can get an invite to that.
Yeah, definitely. And anybody who wants to share this with other people and invite other people to join Leaders Connect, it's not an exclusive club. I'm not trying to open it up to everybody, but I want to have people who are in leadership roles to participate. So if you know other people, let me know. And if you're interested in coaching, either individually or a group with me, let me know about that. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. And I'm going to work with Ethan to try to figure out how to take these techniques into the realm of clinical psychology and coaching, because I think they need to be disseminated. And a lot of coaches are a lot of therapists are kind of stuck now in this mindfulness thing, and they really don't. They need some new ideas to effectively deal with what's going on. So appreciate it. We'll sign off at this point, Emily, and we'll have this video for you Monday. And I'll send it out to everybody. If you're not on my mailing list, please let me know. And Ethan, please put your email on there. And I'm Rob at robpasick.com. We'll also put that on there, and we'll talk to you soon.